Join me for a conversation with Dungeon Master Zac Harrison.
Welcome to DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show. Level up your RPG campaigns by filling yourself with stories and knowledge. Explore topics from archaeology to film history to writing to literature and much, much more. This is DiceGeeks.com Tabletop RPG Show.
Welcome to the show. My name is Matt, and I am your host. This is the podcast where we learn how to become better game masters and role players by filling ourselves with stories and knowledge. All right, guys, I have another awesome interview coming up. But first, and I know you might be getting tired of this, but I could really use your help. The podcast could really use your help as well. If you could like, rate, review, or subscribe to the podcast wherever you are listening right now. Those things help the show immensely, and I would greatly appreciate it. Also, if you want to support the show financially, you can do so at patreon.com/dicegeeks. Also, if you don't know who I am by now, I write the Books of Random Tables. It is a series of books ever growing. I think there are 16 right now. Getting ready for a 17th. I got a 19th, 18th, if I could count, an 18th and 19th books, all kind of in the pipe that are getting ready to come out. So if you need some help cutting down your Game Master prep time, my books can help you. You can find them on Amazon.com, DriveThruRPG.com, and my own website, DiceGeeks.com. All you have to do if you're on Amazon or you're on DriveThruRPG or you're on Google, just type in the Book of Random Tables and my books will come up. Or if you head over to DiceGeeks.com, you can see a lot of them there. All right, guys. Now enough of all that stuff. Here's the interview. My guest today is the winner of the 2019 Game of the Year award on Obsidian Portal. He is a longtime game master, and he is also an Obsidian Portal emissary. Zac Harrison, a.k.a. Conan the Librarian. Zac, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Matt. I'm super excited to be here.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure to have you on. When did you start rolling dice and pretending to be a wizard or whatever?
So the first thing I pretended to be was a werewolf because I had no idea how D&D worked. It was maybe freshman, sophomore year of high school, and I had heard a lot about it, D&D specifically, but tabletop stuff, and I had kind of, satellite watched some of it happen, but didn't really know much until I more or less cornered a friend at a lunch table and told him that I wanted to learn how to play, teach me how to play. So I kind of scratched together this werewolf character guy, and this was 3rd edition. He didn't own any 3.5 books yet, and they were, I think at that time, they'd been coming out for a while, but it was just what he happened to have. And I was a terrible player that didn't understand anything, and all I wanted to do was know more, do more, play more, be more. And it just went from there. That was, I was 20 years ago now, at least. And I haven't stopped playing since.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I know when we always start, I don't know if, unless maybe you're 30 or something, you probably don't know any of the rules when you start.
Exactly. It was awful. I think, because he said, well, you have to have a trigger to transform. And I said, okay, well, then my trigger's blood and I eat this guy. And now am I a werewolf? Am I a wolf dude? And he was like, he's just paging through these 3 books he's got and just thinking this guy is terrible. But he stuck with me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's cool. And I think it is fun when you begin just to not just slam the door on creativity for somebody, especially if it's just you and one friend. I mean, it's just what are the stakes, right? Oh, we botched all the rules. I mean, who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's awesome. But then I take it then you learned how to play D&D a little bit more by the rules.
I did. I've always been kind of a bibliophile. So then, being someone who's always loved fantasy and sci-fi and Tolkien, all of the classics, I got my hands on some of these books and I read them like textbooks, like I was going to take the D&D SATs, and I just studied them and learned them. And, I honestly have never really been a prefab adventure kind of GM. I've always taken different points and portions and segments out of different books and settings and put them together. So I kind of absorbed all these books I could get my hands on. And my first game that I ran, it was probably, I had been a player in several different campaigns for a couple of years. And I threw together this like really low rent, like really bad Forgotten Realms, like Marauding Belms. It was just this hodgepodge of all this junk I kind of threw together, just half ideas I had had as a player, but it was the same group of friends. There was 6 or 10 of us that would kind of rotate through playing or DMing or just throwing this stuff out. And it was the same group of friends that I played with all through high school and even a little bit after that really helped me establish, my style and what I wanted to do. And by the time I got out of high school, I was addicted to GMing, especially when I started getting into other systems. D&D was always really exposed to initially in high school, but finding other systems really opened up more doors.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I will follow up on some other systems, but first, why do you think you aren't really drawn to, say, published adventures or modules? Why do you want to create your own stuff?
Part of it is I don't want to have to stick with something if I want to improv. I'm very much an improv DM. So my prep time, if we're going to play for 4 hours, I've got usually between 4 words and 4 sentences written down, and I have a general idea. For me, the maps that I have either in my head or on paper, the towns really can be anywhere. I put a town down where a player is going to end up. That's where it is on the map. Everything is plot distance away. So when I have a pre-made dungeon, for example, I find it hard to feel like I have the reins on what's going to happen. I understand there's triggers, preset DCs, and those tools. But for me personally, I always end up forgetting details. That's, I think, my biggest flaw is I get super excited with, what my players decide they're going to do, because players are going to find interesting ways to solve problems that a published book or module or adventure isn't going to have in it. So suddenly, for me, when I'm trying to cram this pre-made module around their idea, it's not as fun to me as being able to just kind of go with whatever I can put in front of them that either evolves with them or their problem-solving abilities, or just something that gets a good reaction. Yeah, absolutely. And I have similar feelings as well. I mean, of course, I wrote a little book called The No Prep Game Master. So I may have paged through that a few times.
Oh, well, that's awesome. That's awesome. And my advice is to take pre-published adventures and mine them for ideas, right? Because they have usually some really cool things that I just wouldn't think of,
Absolutely.
Kind of on the fly. And because you do always run into those, there's always the problem, like, well, now it wasn't recently now, but like a year or two ago, I ran Curse of Strahd for my group. And it was the first time that I had run a published adventure in a long time. And needless to say, I deviated quite a bit, especially towards the end. But, there's always those things where, if I'm making it up on the fly, or improving or doing some of these things, like my players asked me, it was like they're in a room and I read the description text and it says there's a candelabra, and my player, what of course does a player ask? They're like, what is the candelabra made of?
Right.
And you're just
made of plot. What do you care? Go.
It's set dressing. Like, what do you think it's made of? Yeah.
It's painted. Just leave.
Yeah, exactly. And you're just like, well, of course, a designer of a module cannot anticipate every question like that, right?
Right.
But as the game master, I need to now, do I look in the book and say, oh, it doesn't say what it's made of, I have no idea? Or do I just say, do I know he's made of silver so he can melt it down and kill werewolves and vampires? So do I just say, oh, it's made out of pewter? And then he's like, oh man, okay. And going on, but
problem solved.
Yeah, problem solved, right? But I think, especially, like years ago, like when I was a teenager, maybe I would have looked through the book and been like, stop the session dead for like 20 minutes and then being like, well, it doesn't say.
Well, the DMG says that usual dressings for a dungeon room like this would include, yeah.
And so I just think it is. I just think it is interesting to really keep the game moving, is to use that improv and just make up something on the spot just to kind of keep it rolling. But mind those things if they have cool stuff in them or maps that you want to use or something. I love that. They have great stuff out there, and there's always a lot of cool stuff. And it is interesting that you say that, like, I know I'm going to follow up on other systems, but that you said even like a map, you feel like that stifles you a little bit.
And well, because again, it's almost like trap in a dungeon, or some sort of puzzle, or even just a room that has what kind of candelabra in it is. There may be a map that has buildings, and this description tells me what's in the buildings. For me, when I'm using most maps, no, that's not to say every map. There are a lot of awesome maps and creators out there, but for me, when I'm creating, I'll have an idea of kind of what I want to go with. And I'll find a map, and aesthetically, this looks good. And I might even, while I'm showing it to the player, say, well, this building isn't here. Just imagine it's something else.
Yeah.
Or it's just trees. Or this says it's full of goblins. Or it says it's made of wood. Or it says it's 100 feet tall. And I'll change it simply because a map to me is what helps you develop the image of something. A map is for landmarkers. I know you said we touch on other systems, but I played 4th edition pretty heavily for quite a while. I've got plenty of hot takes on that, and I know a lot of people do. But that 4th edition, say what you will, is very physicality and tactically based combat movement and set dressings. So while I had, even in the older editions, 3.0, 3.5, there was a lot of 5 foot and graphs and map grids to move on. Maps to me have always been kind of here's the general idea. All right, now let's move forward, because I want the players to be able to develop what it looks like to them, or really absorb the story we're creating together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of have similar feelings. Actually, I put out a book called Fantasy Towns that has maps of 50 towns in it. And I wrote descriptions about different buildings and things. And in the intro, I tried to make people understand that, like, when I was labeling the maps, like, I didn't put numbers on the buildings. And I tell people that, why I don't do that. And I say, because, what if your party enters the West Gate and the cool inn you want them to go to on the map shows it's all the way on the east side. And they're like, well, we're not walking there. And so you could just put the cool tavern or inn the first building they see. And so they're just like, oh, well, we just got to town. There's an inn right here. Let's just go to that.
Yeah, that's my favorite, is a blank map, whether it's a city, whatever it is. And I'll have pre-generated lists or just a few things I've jotted down, because I know I want them to go see the busty barmaid. Like, that's the tavern they're going to go to, and it's going to be right there in front of town, because that's how the story is going to move. And I'm not going to wait, well, they didn't get there, so now I have to figure out, like you said, what's on this side of town.
Yeah.
I don't care about that. Everything can be modular. It's theater of the mind, even if it's written down.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you said you played a lot of 4E. Of course, on my podcast, I've interviewed Rob Hainso, who was the lead designer on D&D 4E.
I definitely listened to that.
Yeah. And so I know there's a lot of controversy about it. I only got to play like twice, but I didn't. I don't know. So I don't have really, any other takes. I was just glad to kind of be playing D&D again, because I had a long hiatus of playing some other systems. And so I know there's a lot of controversy that kind of surrounds.
For all of it, and it's a whole nother podcast, but what I will say, I'd also been on hiatus for a while. There was a box set of 4th edition PHB, DMG, Monster Manual on Amazon for dirt cheap, some sale. And I didn't have a regular group anymore. So I had a buddy who had played forever ago, and his wife, and my wife, who had played a couple times back in college. And I said, listen, why don't we try getting into this? And 4th edition, for all its flaws, is, I will say, the easiest to pick up D&D game, I think, of any edition, because it lays it out. It's evenly powered. There was no confusion about rules themselves. And we played for a long time just because, my buddy, who was a veteran player, easily slid back into it after years and years. And my new players easily got into it. And while there's a lot of complaints that there's not enough storytelling mechanisms, anything you play can have a storytelling mechanism. Honestly, if you are committing to it as either the game master or your players are committing to it. It doesn't matter what's written in the book. Nothing in the book says you can't add flavor.
No, absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more, because I think, I don't know, there are a lot of games out there that, are like, hey, we're a story game, and here are these mechanisms, that you're going to use to tell the story. And I always thought it was interesting, because you could just take some of those mechanisms and just use them in D&D, and there is no change, or some of them, I think I got a little saucy in my book, but it was, it was just like when I said, the mechanism, the game mechanic is ask your players what's there or something. And you're just like, that's a game mechanic? Like, that's not a game mechanic.
And I love that you recently had someone else on about that. And I personally love that, is when you throw it to the player. Part of it too is, personally, like I said, I'm very low prep, and some of it is just, I could be really lazy about it. And sometimes, my players are amazing players. They're just as great as storytellers as well, this sounds conceited, but just as great of storytellers as I am, in that they create so much of their own character and world. So we get into a room and I know it's something tense or they're really excited for, like, hey, what does your character see? And, if they say, well, I see a giant dragon, all right, let's go. But usually what I get out of them is they're creating the same way I am. Just the aesthetic that's been built between us really helps move along on the same track without having to guide them.
And I think, sadly, it took me a long time to realize that. I think I stumbled upon it one time when I had maybe been, GMing like a mega session, and I was tired and the Mountain Dew was running low. And I'm just like, after like the 80 millionth question of the day, I was just like, you just tell me what's on the island. Like, I'm tired. Okay. Like, just tell me what's on the island. And it's just like, it should be very obvious that anybody who is interested in playing, even if they haven't run a game before, is probably super creative. And, they are interested in, at least a character of some type, and can describe you a room if you're tired and don't want to describe the room, or tell you something that's interesting about their character when they meet the king or whatever it is.
Right. They're automatically going to imagine things that their character finds interesting, or what their character would notice. Mm-hmm. And it makes it so much easier to DM when you could just say, yes, that's exactly what you see. Now for the rest of this, like, it makes it so easy because they've built the story for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I find that too, even when just launching like a new campaign, maybe I have some kind of controlling idea that I've lifted from maybe like a movie and a book, and I've combined those two things into a little controlling idea, and I pitch to my players and they're like, yeah, we're into it. Well, I'm going to get most of my hooks and most of my story when they create their characters and their backstory, right? Like, that's where plot and things are going to come from, because, if I pick up on something in their backstory, what is that player going to do? They're going to set down their phone and pay attention to the game, right? Because their character is involved in it, So I think that was, like I said, sadly, it took me a while to realize that my players are actually really creative people, and they would be interested in the game if I opened it up and just kind of mentioned a few things to them here or there and asked them some questions on occasion.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you did say, though, you had played a number of other systems as well, right?
Yeah. So I have the hobby like a lot of forever GMs. I collect systems and books, most of which I'll never play, most of which, I stare at lovingly and will never be able to experience either running or playing in. But excuse me, after I found, or rather after D&D and my normal group kind of dispersed, just life happens, finding White Wolf was a big change. So Exalted, first edition, White Wolf and some of the older D10 systems was really kind of eye-opening, and going from there into the classic D6 systems. I played everything from Star Wars to, White Wolf, Vampire, first edition, everything I could get my hands on, because I also found that as a storyteller, something else I really love is creating systems or kind of toys to play with in game, whether it's a rule set or a mechanic or something else. And like you said, there's nothing in any book that says you can't bring in something, whether it's storytelling mechanics or there's a lot of really great modules out there for adding gritty realism to combat, or even it's a more modern tool these days are safety tools to make sure that players are comfortable and enjoying themselves. Taking all these different tools from all these different systems also gave me a better appreciation for how to run a game, because when you look at, I know I keep going to White Wolf, it's just a good big example because it's so broad and well known.
Sure.
It's a different pace that you tell the story, and even the dice rolling mechanic itself means you're looking for a different result. It's not just purely math. It's about the varying degrees of success or failure versus a hard pass-fail number. And I think that kind of fuzziness that's in a lot of other systems, whether it's D6 systems or Fate and smudgy systems, I was really drawn after, I played D&D for years, into those other systems. And when I was able to get back into D&D, like you said, it was 4th edition, which was very different from any D&D I had played previous to that anyways. Mm-hmm. It made me appreciate more being a little looser with the rules, because narratively, D&D is just as thought-provoking. There's just as much epic storytelling in it, not just because of the good example of Tolkien and Lord of the Rings, but because the mechanics can very easily fall to the background or be dropped when you're just the dice help you tell a story as opposed to just following the dice.
Yeah.
I know that's a long walk on that one, but
no, that's cool. And I think a couple of the points you made there are really important for people who are looking to kind of up their game, improve their game mastering. And one point that I would say run different game systems. Don't just run the same game system over and over again. Even if that's, even if your main group is D&D, which is awesome, try to do a one shot here or there of some other system. And
absolutely.
Even though, kind of like you were saying, even though, the general principle of, say, a role-playing game is going to be, from D&D to, some other systems, the mechanics or how those settings or something, are presented are going to, push you into a new place as a game master, Yeah. And I think that is a great point that, that sometimes, maybe that we don't talk about too much, is that, running science fiction games has helped me become a better fantasy game master, right? Like, and vice versa, right? So
Yeah.
I think it's just kind of all tied in there, and I think that is a really good point that running multiple game systems can actually help you become a better GM.
I think it's definitely helped me personally, and I mean, for all the times I ran a system and just absolutely butchered it, whether running it or as a character just destroying, and may as well throw out some of these rule sets. It gave me a better appreciation for what else is out there, and even just the experimenting you can do in that realm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think I also just learned that in most systems, you just need the game master basically just needs a target number and to know what is easy, difficult, or very, or moderate or difficult for your players. And if you don't know any of the rules other than that, you could still run a game of like D&D, because you can just be like, oh, well, I know a 5 is going to be super easy. As long as you know that you have to do a difficulty number and have somebody roll something, you can actually just get by without knowing hardly any rules.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's something where, certain people think, oh, well, I have to know all the rules to run D&D or something like that. And it's just, it's just not true. I mean, you can even watch Critical Role, and Matt Mercer is like, what was the number on that? How does that work? Right? Like, he says that,
he's writing Wizard of the Coast books, and he's still plenty of times, is that? No, we'll just go, whatever. That was great. Roll.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, was that charisma or dex or what? I mean, it's just like, this happens to everybody, I mean, because, like I've mentioned before on the podcast, it's just like, I don't know how every subclass works, right? Like, there are just some subclasses I've never played or I've never read about even, and a player will show up with one and I'll be like, that's fine. Just as long as you can tell me that you're running, you need to roll a 20-sided dice, plus 12 or whatever, then I'm fine with that, right?
Listen, I'm running the rest of the world. You run your guy.
Yeah, exactly.
You know how that works. That's good enough for me.
Yeah, exactly. And then, so I think, well, I mean, half the point of my little book, The No Prep Game Master, was about taking pressure off yourself as the game master, that you don't have to be some whiz at everything to really just to be able to run a game, because you can do that without having every single rule or anything memorized.
Yeah.
I'm really feeling, I really like, what you're saying here about the way you prep for games and stuff, only having a few sentences, and that, and I think one of the critiques, and this may be, of the No Prep Game Master, that I would offer on myself, and I've mentioned this on the podcast too, is just that sometimes I do forget I've been playing role-playing games since I was 9 years old. And I am not young anymore, so I have a number of decades behind me of role playing. And so that would be my one critique, is that, sometimes no prep game mastering or the improv can come with experience. But I also think it's just just changing your mindset too, that it's just like, I don't have to know all the rules. I don't have to know what they're going to do in the next 15 or 20 minutes. I just have to, I don't even necessarily have to hit them with anything interesting unless they're just wanting to go shopping or something. It's just like,
right.
I can use the hooks and the decisions that my players are making to run them through situations and just kind of let it grow organically without, writing writing Lord of the Rings and, creating 9 elf languages or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'm always, happy to hear when somebody says, that they do kind of minimal prep. And I'll ask you a little bit more about your prep here too.
Yeah.
Because I give away my age on the podcast all the time. I'm 47, and I have, a wife, I have 4 kids. I have responsibilities. I have, an aging mother that needs help sometimes. I mean, if I have 3 hours a night once a week, which I do to play, D&D, I don't have 3 hours on the night before to prep, right? Like those hours are book solid.
Absolutely.
So that is kind of when I'm talking to people, that's the kind of people I'm talking to. It's just like, look, I was able to carve out 3 hours to play with my friends. That means the rest of my week I'm flying, right? Like I'm flying through everything. And so why don't you tell us a little bit more about your prep? I know you said you'd have 4 words or 4 sentences or something like that.
So my prep, you mentioned Obsidian Portal. So I'm pretty good about keeping basic notes as I run through a session. And I keep basic notes. I'm more a bullet point kind of guy personally. And that's because I can't remember names of people I meet in real life. I am not going to remember the names of people I make up, especially when I'm not going to call this guy John every time I make up some, crazy name. I'm not going to remember that in more than likely 3 to 4 weeks because game has been delayed and we're playing again. So when I go through my notes of what I had the previous session, I kind of, I guess, digest it. I do the journaling. I do the adventure log on Obsidian Portal, the site that I love using for a lot of different reasons. But even without Obsidian Portal, what it comes down to when I prep is I know that this person is still around. I know that this is the threat they're going after. And I know I want something cool to happen. So usually my 3 to 4 words or sentences are close allies, close enemies, a type of fight or encounter that I'm thinking, and then some plot development. For a long time, I was very bad about throwing every session a new plot thing. Just every session was some new thing that could lead to something else. It took me a long time to really kind of focus and realize, I can't just keep throwing out new mysteries. I can't keep throwing out new unexplained things. So what I do each session is I try to answer something in the past couple sessions that has come up, or at least give a good clue or hint for it, and then push them forward in the story toward their ultimate goal. So the prep is good guy, bad guy, cool encounter, next step. And those are essentially the bullet points I go for. And anything else is kind of ancillary because they're already in a place, right? Unless you're super high level and they're dimension dooring, they're traveling the planes, they're going all these insane places. Characters can only travel X distance, right? I've already used the term, they can only travel X amount of plot. So if we ended in a tavern last time, they're still going to be in that tavern in that town. If we ended and they were on a boat going to a place, well, I can throw that they're attacked by pirates or merfolk or whatever, but they're ultimately still on the boat going to this place. So I try not, I keep each session is moving forward with really what we're already going in. And I know that may sound fairly obvious, but when I just think this is where they were, these are the people. And you know what? I was looking through this monster manual and this monster is cool as hell. How do I fit this thing in here? Like I'm very guilty of throwing my parties against stuff. I always make sure it's, character level appropriate, but also a good, fun fight with something different. So fighting a sand dragon in the middle of the ocean is going to be different. And maybe it doesn't make a lot of sense, but it can narratively do a lot, or it could just be a fun break for that session or for that story moment itself.
No, that's really cool. And I know you mentioned Obsidian Portal a little bit. Could you explain that a little bit better, for somebody who maybe is listening and just has no idea what Obsidian Portal is?
Sure. Obsidian Portal is a campaign management site. And there's a lot of really great sites out there. I started using Obsidian Portal a long time ago. And at first it struck me as just, this is a wiki where I can keep notes and keep track of gold and treasure. Excuse me. And I went away for a while and came back when I was looking for something to really get in more depth as far as campaign development and tracking and creating. And Obsidian Portal, while at its base is kind of a wiki, the tools that it has are simple but very powerful. So having your main hub of your portal there allows you to keep an adventure log, everything that happened. There's a separate log where you can have all your characters with pictures. So you literally hit your characters and you see everyone that you've added. There's a map that you can place your own maps in the system and then drop landmarks on it. There's, I'm not going to list all the features, but what Obsidian Portal allowed me to do was really easily get into not just campaign tracking, but kind of campaign development, because I was able to do things with it to make my game better. Because I think a lot of us, I think about D&D and tabletop all the time. Like that's always a constant thing in the back of my head. So when I can get on Obsidian Portal and I can do inter-session chat, or not chat logs rather, but forum posts, or create characters or create items, it gave me something to play with. Because for a long time, my characters, I've been playing online for more than several years at this point. Most of my players are scattered across the country. So Obsidian Portal, has given me something almost tactile to play with. When I play in person, I give handouts, I make things, I love terrain, I have stuff in my hands, I stand up and I gesture wildly. So while it's a virtual tool, the way that you can customize it to look however you want, you can interact with it in different ways. So to change the menus or change the way that people can see it or view it, Obsidian Portal comes down to essentially building however your campaign looks aesthetically in your head and to your players. You can create that on Obsidian Portal and make it as accessible to yourself or them, or even just someone browsing your portal itself.
I know there's so many tools nowadays. I just even remember, back not too long ago, it's just like there's an NPC and they're like, oh, what was that NPC's name? And I'm like, well, if you know it, I will give you experience points or something, because we just couldn't keep track of anything. Everybody had different notes, or I had different notes and things. So it is interesting to see how, some of these tools just allow, people to create wikis, for their campaigns and keep everything organized right there. I think that is really cool.
Well, one last thing. The biggest thing is player interaction in it. So I think there are a lot of tools, and I'm never going to minimize anything else out there. Like I said, there are a lot of great tools and a lot of great people making really great things out there. But Obsidian Portal is just as accessible to the players. So as a player, you can send a secret message to the DM or to another player. You can create your own journals. You have free reign to create items or NPCs, journal logs, even your own map. So the fact that it gives that full access to the player, where I think there are a lot of tools out there where the DM has to invest essentially learning coding just to do something and hopes that the players look at it.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Just what a DM needs is more stuff to do, right?
Yeah, because we've got all sorts of free time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, tons of free time. But yeah, and so it is interesting. I know I'm going to ask about your campaign that won an award, but you did mention that you've been playing online now for a while. What was that transition like for you, and how did that change your DMing or GMing in any way?
So it was kind of awkward at first, to be honest. Part of it is just spatially. It was very weird to me to just be staring at my laptop versus people at the table. So when we play, I still gesture wildly, but it's very different to be online versus in person. And, I love my players. I love my groups. I have several great groups, and I'm actually very lucky. One of my best groups is my wife, my mom, my sister, and my brother-in-law.
Well, there you go.
Obviously I live with my wife, but my sister and brother-in-law are in another state, and my My mom is not anywhere near me. So the fact that we can hop on and do that. So I'm very lucky that, when I said, hey, I really want to try this thing, and my family said, okay, well, sure, let's get into it. Let's try it. It helped me personally to have obviously a group of people I'm comfortable with.
Yeah.
But I think, a lot of people are really nervous about online. The best thing I did for myself for online play was this past, I forget when it was exactly. I signed up for GaryCon to DM for a bunch of strangers a one shot I had written. And I was so nervous. I mean, I was sweating bullets because, I've played with my groups for a long time. So it made me nervous to do this thing online. Now, I have DM'd for random people. I've actually been paid to run games for people as well. But it was different to just put a story up, and I was one of 300 GMs posting a story, hey, come play this. But just putting myself out there to a bunch of strangers to just, hey, let's get together and try doing this. I recommend it to anyone, as nervous as it may make you, whether it's people or just looking for group parties online. I'm very fortunate. I had a great experience, and there are going to be some really awful experiences out there. But what you take from it is you get it done, you try it, you find out what's comfortable, you find out what isn't comfortable. And I found that online play has become very comfortable for me because not only did I have to adapt to it, but I found a tool to help me with it. Mm-hmm. I would say that's my biggest thing, is that, I took to it because part of it was necessity, any port in a storm, right?
Yeah.
But also that it allowed me a little more freedom to also be a little more relaxed. I don't have people come to my house. I don't have to travel anywhere. Now, it means no one bribed me with snacks anymore, but it also meant like my prep, whatever I was doing for game, was like, all right, now I can just sit down and play. And when we're done, I close the laptop and I'm done for the day. I don't have to worry about prepping the same way that you do in person. And there's a bit of relief in that, I found, to be honest.
I had never really played online, of course, until the pandemic happened. And so we had a crash course then. And now, of course, we've been playing online ever since. One of my biggest, I guess, problems is one of my tips that I talk about in kind of improving or going no prep is to listen to the table and listen to your players talk about the session and their characters, kind of even while you're walking into the kitchen to get a drink or something, and you're listening out of the corner, the kind of out of the side of your ear or something, and just listening back at the table, and you hear them say certain things like, "Oh, that innkeeper shady," or "Oh, this thing." I wonder if there's something to that mound of dirt we saw on the road. And I would take those and then, give them something they wanted, but put a twist on it. Now that doesn't happen anymore because, we're online. There is no table talk in that regard.
No, you're right. And that is a tough, I'm right there with you. Mm-hmm. DM eavesdropping, you have your screen, you have your notebook, or you're pretending to roll dice when you're trying to think like, all right, well, what the hell happens next?
Oh yeah.
And you're just kind of listening. You're like, oh, they said he was shady. You know what? Yeah, he's shady. Yep. I wrote it down in my notes. Now that guy's shady.
Yeah.
It is tough to have less table talk. That is definitely an impediment. I think part of it is when you get, like we've talked about, getting your players to really help develop the story, asking them what they see, that sort of thing, I think helps you as a DM draw out what they would want you to develop for them.
And then a couple of things I wanted to follow. I wanted to ask you about your campaign, but you did mention that you have been paid to run games in the past. Yeah. And I don't know if anybody I have interviewed has even mentioned that, or we have talked about that. What was your experience like with that?
So, I think there's a lot of, in the more recent, I'd say in the last couple of years, it's become more, I don't want to say acceptable per se, but for a long time, it was almost taboo. Like, why would you charge for this thing? But it's a form of entertainment. When you go and see a movie, you pay X amount for a ticket. You're going to be there for X amount of time. you're going to buy snacks. You go to an amusement park. So I was approached about doing this birthday party. So sure, I'll offer you a couple bucks. Sure. And it was weird at first. It really was, because it was at first I thought, why am I charging for this thing that I just love doing? Right. Mm-hmm. I run games all the time for people that care way less than that. They're on their phones the whole time. Why am I charging to do this? But having done it several times, what it comes down to is, like any service you're going to provide someone, is making sure that if whether it's $5 an hour, whether someone's going to throw you $20 or some very decent money, there are whole sites out there now dedicated simply to professional GMs finding players who are willing to pay X amount to be part of a campaign, right? Or players looking to pay someone to run a game for them just because they want a DM or GM. It's it's something I would do again, simply because it's fun, and everybody likes making money, but it also kind of gives you it gave me a sense of accomplishment, right? I did this thing, they enjoyed it. Yes, there was a transaction, but what it came down to was, for me, it pushed me to develop a professional, quote unquote, professional polished product, to develop an experience that otherwise, I might not deliver to my buddies who are always on their phones the whole time anyways.
Yeah. I mean, and I think you're right. Even 5 years ago, I think there was kind of a stigma around it or something. And now it's pretty much just gone, that it's just like, I don't know. I think if, especially for me, like remembering back to certain times, in my gaming life, if you can even call it that or whatever, but there were just times when you just could not find a group. And there are people who are in that situation where they just cannot find a group, or they have been the forever GM forever, and they're just like, I would like to
get out of it. Yeah.
I just want to do something different. Or they're like, well, nobody is playing X game, and I see a group here that this, DM is, or GM is going to run, is willing to run this game that nobody else runs or something. I mean, so to me, it just makes it, it makes total sense. Well, and I don't know. Some people have gone a little crazy with it. I think sometimes, talking about the stigma around it, and I just, I don't know. I don't really get that. I
think for me, there's been a large conversation lately about creators being paid fairly for their work, right? Published content, especially, it's all over Twitter. It's all over social. Yeah. It's very common right now, especially in the tabletop community, because more and more publishers are busted not paying creators, that sort of thing, or independents whose work is just either plagiarized or flat out being given away, stolen, sold under a different name, whatever it is. I think it's part of that whole conversation. Is it's the content, whether it's written in a book or you're delivering it on the spot. It's content, it's creation, it's experience, time, effort that's going into it. So that's not to say I would DM for pretty much anyone, any system, anytime. But at the same time, when it's, hey, this is a professional thing, or hey, it's this birthday party, I want a good experience, would you do this thing, because we know that you can deliver, or we'd really like something from someone that can deliver something enjoyable. I think that's what it comes down to. I had really bad imposter syndrome about it for a while, and there was one game, I'll be quite honest, they were going to throw me a few bucks because it was kind of a drive for me. And the game did not go well. And because one of the players didn't show up, and someone else had a completely different expectation, even though we'd had kind of a pseudo session zero about it. And at the end of it, I said, listen, this was fun. I'm glad we got to do this. Let me know if you guys want to play sometime. I didn't charge them because it was, at the end of the day, it wasn't something worth delivering and saying, I'm putting my name on it because you're putting my name on a check. Like, this is just some folks getting together and not the polished product I would want to put out. If you're gonna publish a book, you're not gonna publish your notebook with scribbles in it. You know what I mean? And I kind of felt the same way. I'm not going to charge them for this session that I flubbed halfway because I wasn't getting response and they weren't, it's a very specific situation that I think you have to be very comfortable dealing with people and understanding that dynamic of it, I guess.
I think you're right. If somebody's paying you for it, you should try to deliver something at a little higher expectation.
Yes.
If I'm running a game for my friends that I've known for 25 years and they know I just ran in the door from other obligations and stuff like this, and we're all just enjoying our company as well. Right. Half of it is just enjoying each other's company. It's just like, well, sure, I'm just going to kind of do whatever comes along and make up some stuff. And it's a bad session. Oh, well, we'll do it again next Monday and we'll, I'll salvage something. But
right.
Yeah, I think there is kind of that expectation. But I do think, though, too, you brought up an interesting point, and I know we're going on here. I haven't even asked you about your campaign yet, but you brought up something else that it's just like there's so many content creators. There is something about a dungeon master or a game master that I think, does separate that from a lot of different things. And that is that a game master, dungeon master creates, even if they're doing improv, they create a bulk of content and they leave like a huge trail of content like behind them. And that's
a good way to put that. I like that. You're completely right. Is whether even it's just throwaways. And I think we all have, as DMs, we've said something as a throwaway and a player picks it up and is like, oh, this is the most interesting thing ever. And you're thinking like, I didn't even write that down. What are you talking about?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think, that we're realizing in this day and age, right, that content has value, right? that would either just provided, right to your game group, which, or to a game group that will, pay for that experience, or the content that's created afterwards, that there are game groups who would pay for that material as well. And that's basically how I got started publishing role-playing game, books, is that I was creating material anyway. So why not put it onto a place where people can enjoy it and, and spend, and get value out of that material because, we're in this age, right? Everything is content. Everything is being produced. We, we're looking for all of these things. I mean, we have $300 million Marvel movies up against $2 billion, or $4 billion budgeted video games. And we have 3-minute YouTube videos made by a 15-year-old, and they're all hilarious and they're all entertaining. Right. And, I think that we should realize that it is just another kind of content experience, and that I don't know. I'm kind of rambling now. I'm thinking more of that. But I did want to ask you really quick before I should let you go here. Tell us a little about your campaign that you won this award for. That is awesome.
So the campaign itself is called Cold Truce, and Cold Truce took place. I did a session 0, and something I do before every campaign is a session 0. I have an idea of what I want to do, and I kind of put it out to my players. I always ask, all right, so I'm thinking this, what about this is something you would like to see? And my players said they wanted kind of the Cold Truce comes from essentially Cold War. So it's set in this kingdom that it had been split about 500 years before, after this horrible catastrophe. And the catastrophe itself had been wiped from everyone's memory. So, it was 500 years ago. There were some folks that, it's fantasy. There were some folks that were still around from that time. And even from what they knew, it was hard to ever find any information about it. So Cold Truce itself was my group trying to stave off this war that was being triggered by this mysterious merchant, goes by the merchant, who is triggering these horrible events between these two kingdoms to try to reenact this war. And, flare up tensions by creating and setting off these catastrophes, these mammoth monsters and abominations attacking border cities, for example, or ships being sunk, trains being derailed. So it's my party, my players were trying to track this person down and find their origins. And essentially what it, as we get further and further into the campaign, they're recruited by the Wall. And the Wall is essentially the group that keeps the peace. They're of neither government or any kingdom, but they stem the tide of war. They simply just make sure that there is peace and no side gains an upper hand to enact what historically is known to be a horrible war that was fought before. So Cold Truce, I am very honored to have won that, because there are I was up against some just amazing campaigns. What won it was not just, obviously I love the story, my players love the story, and I think it developed in a lot of amazing ways. I was able to customize the portal. I actually started learning CSS basic programming to customize the look of my portal. So I was able to create custom menus and interactive components to the site. So say I drop the link right now and you go to it, you would be able to follow the story. You would be able to go to the characters. You'd be able to see the timeline and follow the links in each thing. And I think that's what helped me, was aesthetically, and I mentioned this kind of at the top, that I was able to create this campaign online aesthetically matched the story and the campaign we were playing at the table. So I still have some of my favorite moments in any game I've ever played in 20 years come from that campaign. And we still on hiatus, like a lot of campaigns these days. We are still going to be getting back into it because there's still so much more they haven't found. I've got a full notebook of stuff that will hopefully blow them away, like some of the other stuff that happened before.
That sounds really incredible. And I've had you on here a long time, so we're coming down to the end. Where can people look at your campaign, and where can people learn more about you?
Sure. So you can find me on Twitter at Conan_Librarian. That's CONAN _LYBARIAN, Librarian. At Obsidian Portal, you can just search Conan Librarian. On Obsidian Portal, it's the same, Conan_Librarian, Obsidian Portal. And you'll be able to find, I actually have a lot of different campaigns. I just put up, I'm working on a little project today that I put up I'm pretty excited about too. But you can also find me on the Obsidian Portal YouTube channel. For Obsidian Portal, I have done some Kickstarter reviews, some really great dice tray company did a review for them. And I do card pack openings. So random non-sports trading cards, I pop those open and create one-shot stories and system agnostic one-shots for people to drop in at home based on the cards that I open out of these packs.
Well, that sounds awesome. And I will be sure to put those links in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. So anybody out there who is listening right now can head over to dicegeeks.com, find the show notes for this episode, and you will see all the links there and be able to check out everything that Zac is up to. Well, Zac, this was a great conversation. I always enjoy talking to somebody who loves role-playing games as much as I do. So it was really awesome. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Yeah, Matt, this was a blast. I really love doing this. And it's nice to talk to another DM that's as about, unprepared and being prepared to be unprepared as I usually am, because it's refreshing because I get a lot of sideways stares about it sometimes. So you are an inspiration out there to a lot of us.
All right, there you have it, guys. I really hope you enjoyed my conversation with Zac today. We touched on a lot of topics and gave a lot of advice for running campaigns. I hope you got a lot out of this episode. If you want to learn more about Zac, as I mentioned in the episode, you can find links to Obsidian Portal and his campaign in the show notes for this episode at dicegeeks.com. Just head there, find the show notes for this episode, and you will find those links. All right, if you want some free stuff, head over to dicegeeks.com/free. You get 10 free dungeon maps. You'll never miss an episode of this show. And each and every Friday, you'll get an email update from me letting you know what is going on in this wild, wild world that I like to call Dice Geeks. All right, guys, I've been given the pitch at the top. This is where I used to give it. But please, if you could support the show in some way, it would be awesome. Like, rate, review, subscribe. That would be awesome. All right, guys, it is my privilege to come to you each and every Wednesday. I thank you so much for listening. And until next week, keep gaming.